What is going on, my friends? I want to thank you for stopping by. You got Stirk here, and I'm going to be doing something a little bit different today. I'm going to be telling you about a new challenge that I made. So if you're like me, you love going through the old Pokemon games and replaying them. You love even going through the new ones and finding new ways to make them more challenging, to have a fresher take on them. Because if you've played something before, you might love it, but you know what's coming. And let's all be real with ourselves. Not many of the Pokemon games are all that difficult. Most of them would be considered very easy by a lot of gaming standpoints. But something I love about the Pokemon community is we keep going back to these games and we come up with challenges, new ways that we can really spice things up and make things harder and have a new experience with them. And one of the biggest ways to do that is with different types of playthrough challenges. Whether you're going through and doing a mono-type challenge, a no-item run, an Iron Man challenge, some sort of Nuzlocke, whether it's a cage lock or a type lock or an extreme randomizer playthrough. You might even have heard of something called a chess lock. And I'm not going to lie to you, I think chess is a really cool game. I love it. It's been a big part of human culture for hundreds of years. All these different cultures, they play this game even if it's played slightly differently throughout the years. It's something fun. Kids can play it, adults can play it, they can play it against each other. People who are very smart sometimes get beat by someone who's not as smart as them. There's strategies you can learn. You're always trying to think steps ahead. I've compared Pokemon and chess before, saying competitive Pokemon is very serious in that way that you're supposed to be thinking multiple turns ahead. How can you set up your end game and get either a long win or a quick win, whatever it may be. And me being as silly as I am, thought I could just create a challenge run and call it a chess lock and be good, compare Pokemon to chess, as if that hadn't been done before. So I went and looked it up. Yep, there's something called a chess lock already. Duh, of course there is. But I didn't want to abandon this idea because when I looked at the rules, they had a different take on how I wanted to do it, and I think that's something special about things. So really, I just needed to come up with a new name, and what I came up with is something called a Pawnlocke. Now, I think this works for a few reasons. First of all, because in chess you have 6 different types of pieces, and they all have their different uses, and some are more strong than the others, and a pawn would be considered probably the weakest and least significant piece. But in the run I did, I made it so that these are also just as important, and you're going to be seeing quite a few of them, so they're still important. And on top of that, Pawnlocke is a fun little play on words because if you know where the term Nuzlocke came from, it was someone writing this story about a Nuzleaf named John Locke going on its journey. That's how Nuzlocks came to be. Pawnlocke rhymes with John Locke. I only kind of planned that, not really, but it worked out cool, so let's go ahead and go through the rules, and then we'll go through the different pieces, the strategies you have to have, how you would have to go about to successfully complete I almost said a John Locke, a Pawnlocke. So the first rule, first and foremost, a Pawnlocke is a type of Nuzlocke. So real quick to go through the Nuzlocke rules. If a Pokemon is knocked out, rest in peace, it is dead for the rest of the playthrough. Some heartless people will tell you that you must then release that dead Pokemon. I'm not one of those people. Box it, make a nice little resting ground for it, a cool little background, and say rest in peace with a little broken heart. The first encounter per route is what you have to add and catch to your team. That sentence almost made sense. You got what I was saying. If you don't like your first encounter and you see something you like better later on, too bad. You got to stick with your first encounter. If you accidentally knock out the Pokemon and aren't able to catch it, tough luck. You don't have an encounter for that route. You have to make nicknames for all of your team members so that you get more attached to them. That one's always very fun and very sad when they go. And then for me personally, I always add a shiny clause. If you get a shiny Pokemon, add that thing to your team. It's rare and it's cool and it's awesome. Coming in at number 2 are the rules that I have made for this challenge. The Nuzlocke is obviously something already existing. Rule number 2, one of each chess piece must be represented on your team at all times. If none of a particular piece is in your reserves, you may use a second pawn. So I'll explain more how the pieces come to be on your team. But essentially, you have 6 team members. There are 6 chess pieces. As you go through, you will build a full team of chess pieces. As you get extras past that, they can be picked to be other types. I'll explain that more. The third rule is one that the first part is my official rule, but I sometimes add in a little, but for an easier challenge. So, rule number 3, your starter Pokemon must be a pawn or a king. That sounds kind of fun at first because Could the two pieces be any more opposite? I guess in some ways they're similar. They're both only supposed to move really like basically one space at a time. But a pawn is a weak, insignificant piece. There's so many of them, right? And a king, there's only one of. And when your king dies, you lose. They seem very different. I'm going to explain why in my ideal Pawnlocke it would have to be one of those two as we go through the roles. For an easier challenge, you can make the starter Pokemon you get any piece. That's fine if you think, hey, my starter's who I'm going to be attached to, it's going to be strong. I want to make that my queen. You go ahead and do that. It's your run. But by the official rules, I would say it needs to be a pawn or a king. We'll explain that more why later on. Rule number 4, if your king dies, the run is over. Surprise, surprise. That's how chess works. When your king is taken out, it's checkmated. You lose, blah, blah, blah. So for a less intense challenge, if the king dies, it may be replaced with pawns only for the remainder of the challenge. So if you're someone like me, sometimes I'll play through a Nuzlocke and I'll be pretty far in and I'll lose. And I'm like, okay, I lost, I'll admit it, but I want to keep playing. So I'll just kind of get some more Pokemon and keep going on with the Nuzlocke. I think if you want to do that, that's completely fine. If your king dies, you technically lost the run, but if you want to keep going, replace your king with a pawn, you'll have multiple pawns on your team. That makes sense. There's a lot of pawns on a chessboard. Rule number 5, pieces are chosen by assigning a pawn capture. To keep going on, if you wanted to do more of like a randomizer, you would roll 1 through 6 and it would tell you what your piece is going to be. So another piece cannot be assigned until you have a full set of 6. So you go through, you've got 3 encounters, say you've got a pawn, a knight, and a queen. If you catch another Pokemon and you're like, oh, this is really powerful, I want this to also be a queen. Too bad, you need to build your full set of 6 before you can start having reserves of your pieces. That'll make a little more sense when we get to our rule number 6. Rule number 6, you have a max number of pieces that you can have for each piece. This is so that you don't have your 6 pieces and then a million queens on your bench. That's overpowered, right? And you could change up these numbers how you want to. I kind of went with these. I don't know if they're perfect, but I tried to do some math and make these make sense. So you have your knights, rooks, and bishops. You have a max of 4 of each of those for your playthrough. So as you're catching your encounters, throughout a Pokemon game, you might get 25 to 30 encounters, let's say. So knights, rooks, and bishops would make up 12 of the members of your team. Plus 2 queens would make up 13, 14, plus a king makes 15. So say 15 of your encounters have been made those pieces. Say you had 25 encounters, the remaining 10 are all pawns. So while you're going throughout the game, you're going to need to make sure you're assigning these kind of evenly and really being strategic about who gets what part so that you don't go over this threshold or so that you don't get all your bishops killed off early and have to place it exclusively with pawns for the rest of the game. I said exclusively. Exclusively. So say you did lose all of your bishops, you can't just be like, well, I'll just have 2 rooks. I know there are 2 rooks on your side of a chessboard. Has to be a pawn taking that spot. This is part of the Pawnlocke, and we're making pawns a little bit more important here. We're making your playthrough a little bit harder. You'll understand that more when we go through each piece. Rule number 7, each gym, rival, boss, or Elite Four battle must have a pawn or a knight as your lead going into the battle. I know sometimes a rival or boss comes up unexpectedly. That's fine. You know, we're human. We forget things. But you know you're going into a gym leader battle. You know you're going into an Elite Four battle. You must have a pawn or knight as your lead for that. Not for every battle, just for the big ones. That being, when you start a chess game, you have 2 options. Do I want to move a pawn? Or with a knight being the only one that can jump over the other pieces like that, you could move a knight early. So that's why I did that, just to be a little more thematic, but also to have pawns be more significant. If you're going into a battle and you're worried leading off with your knight could put you in a situation where it's going to have to take damage, you might want to start with your pawn if you're a little less worried about losing it. You have to be strategic there. For Rule 8 legendaries, this is another one of those that, like, I'm kind of giving you multiple options here. I would probably do just no legendaries for my run just to make it a little bit harder. If you want to have legendaries and still make it hard, maybe you could force them to be your queen. Or maybe you could even just say, like, well, they could be any piece within reason, but maybe you're only using 600 base stat total or less legendaries. So you could use, like, a Zapdos or a Tornadus, but you couldn't use a Reshiram or a Lugia, right? Because those are quite a bit more powerful. You go for a less powerful one, and you could at least make it, like, semi-fun. But for me, there's a good chance that I would either say no legendaries or Maybe if I save one of those legendaries to be one of my other queens, that could make sense. So rule number 9, switching members in and out is allowed, but only for a matching piece. Now, some Nuzlockes don't let you even do this. They would say, like, you can only replace a member if it is KO'd and dies. And then a lot of people say, no, that's fine to switch in and out as you go. That's up to you, but I'm going to say it is allowed, but it's within reason, right? If I decided to get rid of a pawn, only another pawn could come in. Same thing with queens. You get it, you get it. And just seeing the word switch, Pokemon you can play in set or switch. Switch being you get the option, hey, your rival is about to send out a Gastrodon. Do you want to send out your grass type and have an easy advantage? Play this on set. That's how Nuzlockes are traditionally done, unless they're like really hard and that's the only way you feel like you can beat it, which is okay. I'm just saying, if we're going with rules here, I saw that and I thought I should probably have that in. Play it on set. It makes more sense to me. I think it makes a lot more sense with chess too. You know, you can't just be moving pieces around all the time. You have to think about, is this a good time to make a sacrifice? Can I get this switch safely in without putting something else at risk? It's a very chess-like thought process to play on set, in my opinion. Rule 10, the last real rule, all Pokemon should be within 5 levels of each other for a gym, rival, boss, Elite Four battle. Try not to be above the opponent's highest level. These are flexible, right? Maybe you want to be a few levels above them because you know you're going to get your team waxed otherwise. That's fine. You know what you want to do with your playthrough, but something like this, all Pokemon within 5 levels of each other, I would personally actually try to do like 2 or 3. But this is so that you don't have a level 14 pawn on your team with a level 62 queen and a level 50 knight and just really tilt the scales to where it's an easy run. Like, if they all have to be within each other, within that range of each other, that means you're using a lot of your teammates in battle, finding ways to make them work, and so that they all have to contribute and they're not just getting dragged along. Plus, it's just so easy. Another thing, if you get 20 levels over leveled, of course you're going to sweep through the game without deaths. If that's how you have fun, go for it. But if you're going by the rules I'm setting here, make it hard on yourself, make it difficult, make yourself really think here. And like I said, I'm one who likes to keep my Pokemon's levels close, just out of how my brain works, but just for the sake of the challenge, keep them close to each other. And to kind of go on top of that, like, don't just give your weakest member an experience share. And in fact, I would probably, it's not a real rule, but something like only use an experience share if you're grinding is something I would do with something like this. So let's hop into our pieces. I'll try not to be too super long, and if I start looking down a lot, that is because there's a good chance my screen messes up at some point, so I have to look down at my phone for some notesies. So piece number 1, we've got our pawn, and obviously it does not have to be like a poniard where it actually looks like a pawn for its part. But the first rule with a pawn is this Pokemon cannot evolve to its final stage until the gym challenge has been completed. So if you did catch a poniard, it is a poniard until you have 8 gym badges. You could go a few ways with this. Me personally, I think I would say, like, for any pawns you have, they would have had to have been with you for like a certain amount of gyms to be able to do the next step that you're going to be able to see. I guess you could say once you've beaten the Elite Four, any pawn can upgrade. This is in reference to the fact that when you're playing chess, if you get your pawn to the very end of the board where the very back row is, I don't know if this is actually official rules, but pretty much everyone I've ever played with you get to switch that out for another piece, so your pawn essentially gets upgraded to another one. So once you beat the gym challenge, the 8 gyms, once that happens, it can adopt the role of a rook, a knight, or a bishop. And in some scenarios, it could become a queen if you don't have any remaining queens. The point of that is just so you don't just keep getting a ton of queens on your team. So once again, you can play with that how you want. For me, I'd probably only do like the pawn that was with me when I beat the gym challenge is one that could be upgraded just to make it a little harder. So these can hold any items but an Eviolite or a choice item, just so that, like, the whole point of these is they are supposed to be a little weaker and you're excited that you're making it work with this weaker Pokemon on your team. You know, if you got an Eviolite on your Porygon 2, it's just as strong as a Porygon Z. Or if you have a choice band on your Poniard and you're just wrecking things with Sucker Punch, maybe that's a little bit too easy. I don't know. So for me personally, I would not let it use those items, but it can use any other item in the game, which is pretty good when you'll see some of the other things are not able to do that. Such as number 2, the Knight. This Pokemon may only use attacking moves, so no status moves or setup moves on this. No hazards, nothing like that. Attacking moves only. So when possible, you must have at least 2 stab moves and 1 coverage move. A stab move, most you probably know, but it means same type attack bonus. So if I had a Zebstrika here, that would be an electric type move because it's an electric Pokemon. Would need to have 2 stab moves, 1 coverage move, meaning a type that it's not. For example, it learns Overheat, a fire move. So that's in reference to the fact that Knights move 2 spaces up and 1 to the side, or 1 up and 2 to the side. So that's just a little fun, but all 4 need to be attacking moves. This is so you can't get something like an Escavalier, which looks like a Knight, and use Swords Dance and Setup and Sweep. It can only use attacking moves. For held items, it can only use an item that boosts its stats or its power. So for example, something like a Magnet, an Expert Belt, a Choice Scarf. There's a ton of these, so it's easy for a Knight to find an item. Every type has a boosting item. There's a lot of stat boosting items too that you can use, an Assault Vest. Just all over the place, you've got options like this. So this would be a pretty strong member on your team, and it's how probably a lot of people play a Pokemon playthrough, is they pick a lot of attacking moves and just kind of go with it, right? But the fact that only 1 member is going to be doing this, the other ones are going to be doing different things. Like, for example, piece number 3, you've got a Rook. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, Duraludon probably wouldn't fit a Rook very well. I just thought it was kind of like tower building shaped, so I thought that was funny. Anyway, this Pokemon must have at least 2 non-attacking moves, so a status move, a setup, a hazard, etc., and it may have a max of 2 attacking moves. That means it can also have less than 2 attacking moves. I would say, I guess it technically doesn't need to have any. It just has to have at least 2 non-attacking moves. So I'm going to give you an example. Think about something like a Ledian. So you see that Ledian, or say you run into a Ledyba at some point, and I would look at that. I would think, I don't want that to be a pawn, because Ledyba is a very weak Pokemon. I would think, I do not want that to be my king. What if I kill it off? I don't want that to be my knight, because it's a terrible attacker. But something like a Rook, that could make sense, because it can learn moves like Light Screen and Reflect, or Thunder Wave and U-Turn. It can do all these support type moves, so it would be very good for a Rook here, because then it would still have some use. So here's where I might lose some people. They can only hold crafty items. Now, this is a little bit hard to define, so you'd have to look through a lot of the items and figure out and kind of make some judgment calls. But something like a weakness reducing berry, like Duraludon holding a Shuka Berry so that it's no longer for that turn weak to ground type moves, or something like a Light Clay to make screens last longer, a Mental Herb, Bright Powder, things like that are kind of like tricky and kind of they're support type moves. They really make you think about how you're going to use them. I don't know how true this is, but I was looking up like inspiration for a Rook. Like, why is it a castle? I guess a Rook's also like a type of bird, but I guess in more olden times a Rook could also be someone who was kind of like crafty and sneaky. It almost seemed like they might be more of like a spy type thing. So I thought of this kind of like more support role type thing. Maybe something like a Grimmsnarl or a Whimsicott would be good at this. Also, them being limited makes sense with a Rook's movements. They can only move straight or sideways. They can't go diagonal. They can't do anything like what a Knight could do, going jumping over things. They have certain things they can and can't do. And on the flip side of that, I always think of Rook. I think of Bishop. The spots just kind of, those pieces kind of go in my mind together as being very similar. And I guess it's because Bishops move similarly except opposite. They do diagonal instead of straight, but all they can do is move diagonal. If something's in their way, they can't jump over it. If a Bishop starts on a white square, it can only end up on diagonal white squares. It can never end up on a black square, and vice versa. So looking at that, when I think of a Bishop, I think of a Pokemon that could only use stab moves. Same type attack bonus moves. Now, to specify this, these don't just have to be attacking moves. So if I'm on the right slide like I think I am, you should be seeing an Armarouge on the screen, because my screen is crapping out. But Armarouge is a Fire and Psychic type Pokemon, so it could only learn Fire and Psychic moves as a Bishop. So thinking about that, say it learned its signature move, Armor Cannon. Then I was like, well, let's also teach it Flamethrower and Psychic. So you got 3 moves there. And I don't have to make all of them an attacking move, but I can't click something like Protect. That's a normal move. It can't have that. I couldn't give it a coverage move like Shadow Ball. That's a ghost move. I could give it something like Will-O-Wisp. That's a status move, but it's a fire type status move. I could give it something like Light Screen. That is a psychic type status move. So you could give them any moves as long as they fall within one of its types. Now, this could also be limiting. Say you had something like a Reuniclus. Reuniclus is a very strong psychic attacker, so you could make that your bishop and just use all psychic moves. It could learn some recovery moves, it could learn Calm Mind, it could learn Psychic and Psyshock, Stored Power, all those. But it only gets psychic moves. It gets immediately shut down by like a dark type or a steel type. It can't have those, so you'd have to think about when you get a dual typed Pokemon, is that something I want to save for being my bishop? If you get a strong singular type Pokemon, how can I make that work in another role? So in here, with the items, I gave them healing items. That was the only way I could really think to split those up into 3 different categories. Healing items, thinking of something like a Citrus Berry or an Iapapa Berry to heal back some HP, or a Lumberry to get rid of any sort of status condition you have, or Leftovers or Shell Bell to get some health back each turn. So thinking about those, I thought maybe that made sense with a bishop, because I always thought a bishop being in chess was weird, but apparently, like in the European versions when that started, and sometimes back then in war, bishops would be like on site with some of the soldiers. So I'm thinking like maybe there's some sort of like healing type of thought process there, like spiritual healing, or maybe they had some sort of expertise in physical healing. So healing items, yay, we'll use that there. I did consider just putting like items to be attacking items and non-attacking items, and then having one of these classes of pieces only not being able to have any items. But I felt like that just really limited them, so I figured, for me, split them up 3 ways. If you're playing through the game and you decided you wanted to do it another way, that's completely fine. Piece number 5, you guessed what is coming. We have the Queen. And surprise, surprise, the Queen is the best piece in chess. It can move any direction it wants to, except it can't move like a knight. I always thought that was funny. But it can move in any direction. It can move sideways, diagonal, 1 space, 5 spaces. It's the most powerful piece, and it's going to be your most powerful Pokemon. No move limitations. It can learn any move it wants to. If it can learn a TM, it can use it. If it's a coverage move or a stab move or an attacking move or hazards, you can do anything with it. Same thing with items. Give it any item in the world that you want to give it. There's no limitations here. This is probably to a pretty big extent going to carry your team, but you have to be careful. You only have 1 extra queen. And thinking about how you pick your queen, bear in mind that when you make your first set of encounters, they're all going to be pretty early on. So there's probably not going to be anything just too ridiculously strong yet. Now you can be strategic. In each game, you know there's a chance of this route could have some pretty powerful Pokemon. Is that what I would want to end up making my queen? Like I said, if you wanted to go a different way, you could make your starter your queen because it is a powerful Pokemon. I get why you'd want to do that. There's also no rules that say like play Pokemon how you want. If you wanted to port in a few Pokemon to your game, if you have Pokemon Home and you wanted to do it that way, or have a friend trade you one, like if that's how you want to play, go for it. Maybe that's the way you wanted to have that happen. I guess you could also even skip a few routes for encounters and come back to them later. Me personally, I'd pick the first 6, or my starter and first 5 routes, and I'd make myself do that. But I mean, if you think, well, my queen should be powerful, so I'm going to wait a while to get my 6 encounters, you're welcome to do that. Don't forget your encounters that you skipped. Or you could even make that a rule. Routes you skip, you can't go back to, and you'd get less encounters. There's a lot of ways you can customize it, but that's something interesting to think about, is your second queen would probably be a lot stronger than your first queen. Like, I would try to get my first queen to be strong, but then I would save that second queen slot, because when you're picking your backups, doesn't matter what order you do it in, you don't have to build a second set or anything. You're just picking whatever you want. I would wait until something really strong came along and make that my second queen. And then you could switch those out. You could wait. You play with it how you want. This Pokemon's going to be great. Obviously, Sarina is probably not as strong as what most of us would be thinking we'd be wanting in that, but Queenly Majesty is its ability. It was just right there. So, and then coming up with the last spot, we've got the King, and of course I had to go with my boy Nuzocke. And here it does make sense to have a Pokemon that you're really attached to that you wouldn't want to let die. And these Pokemon could still be powerful in their own right, just like a King is. A King can move in any direction. A King can take out technically any piece. Especially you can be pretty strategic with kind of baiting into something trying to checkmate it and then being able to kill it. But Kings in chess are very limited in that they can only move one space at a time, albeit in any direction. So what I wanted to do to limit a King here is it can learn any move from its level up moveset. And that's it. Nidoking, for example, is a Pokemon known for being able to learn a lot of really cool TMs. If I made that my King, he cannot learn Surf or Ice Beam or anything that's not in his natural moveset. Now, one rule would be, say you found like a move tutor. You can't use a move tutor that would teach you moves not in your learn set, but you could do like a move relearner. So if you had a Pokemon that was a stone evolution that only learned moves in its past, one of its past evolutions, you would be able to use those because that is its natural level up. But that's how I'd limit the King. You'd want to make sure to pick a Pokemon that has a good move set with hopefully some sort of decent coverage or some strong attacks and maybe some strong support options. How do you want to go about that? Maybe is that why you want to make your starter the King, so that it's fairly strong, has a fairly decent level up move set, and you'd really have to be strategic about what you'd want to do, because you also don't want to pick something that's going to die easily, because that could end your run. And for items, I did give it one item limitation, being under no circumstances can you have your King hold a focus sash. That's just too easy, right? Like, you're trying to keep this thing alive, so don't give it the thing that's going to always make it stay alive. And you can do what you want. I wouldn't pick a Pokemon with like Sturdy to be able to have that either, just because once again, that's fine if you want to do that, but that's just making it too easy. The King is supposed to be like vulnerable, so I do think it'd be fair to make it hold a focus band, because that's completely luck based. So basically focus sash, you live a hit at 1 HP if you're at full health when you get hit with that. A focus band, you have a 10% chance anytime that you would be about to be knocked out to live on 1 HP. And that doesn't happen often, and if it does, maybe that's the fates saying you deserved for this to live. So you can throw whatever rules you want on that if you don't want to be able to use that either. But I do think this is a fun way to make the King a fairly good member of your team. One you're still a little worried about throwing out, but also one that is limited in its own right. So those are the 6 pieces. Hopefully we got the right slide on the screen. Hopefully you're seeing that this is what I call the Pawnlocke. So now I want to hear from you. Is this something you'd consider trying? Do you want to try doing this variation of a Nuzlocke to see if you can beat one of your favorite games, or maybe even a fan game? If you're someone who does online playthroughs and wants to do a Pawnlocke, I would be honored if you do that. I want to do one myself someday. If you do that, I just ask that you credit this to me. Maybe even throw this video in your description. I don't know. There's a good chance that no one ever plays this besides me. That's also okay, because I'm going to have some fun with it. But I would also just love to hear your feedback. Do you think these rules make sense? Is this a fun way to go about playing Pokemon? Do you think my rules are whack? I'm cool hearing that too. That's still fun. I love having those conversations. But really, above anything, I'm just really thankful that you took the time to watch this. Give me your feedback. Share this around if you would. And have yourself a great night. Peace.